Ross is actually quite generous with scholarships of the top 10 business schools. That was my experience from just doing research and also from looking at our classmates. So there are 3 scholarships that I know of that cover full tuition. Dean's Impact, and Health Innovation Scholar. My roommate, Health Innovation Scholar, she worked in pharma prior to Ross, so her entire tuition was covered. Dean's also is a 100% tuition scholarship. Dean's Impact is 100% tuition plus like a stipend you get to cover your living expenses too, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's about $15,000.
Yeah, they're basically paying you to come to school. Now, I can't speak, and even they can't speak for sure what exactly helped them secure Dean's and Dean's Impact. I think Health Innovation is pretty straightforward even then. Dean's and Dean's Impact, I would say it's like a mix of everything is what they always say, like your amazing work experience, leadership roles, GMAT, whatever you have with great essays. But I just wanted to put this out there for like prospective students to keep it in mind to position their applications in the best way possible, because Ross has these opportunities and they give it every year to at least a good number of our classmates have them. Welcome to Business Beyond Usual. My name is Aishwarya Dhume and we are recording live from the Ross School of Business once again. I'm here with Jasmin Lopez, and today we're going to be talking about financing the MBA.
Before we get started, we want to encourage you to get in touch. We always love engaging with our listeners, and we'd love to hear from you. Send us a message at bbupodcast@umich.edu. That's bbupodcast@umich.edu. Follow us on Instagram at Ross_BBU. That's Ross_BBU. And feel free to DM us there as well. Ask us all of your questions, suggest episode topics, or just say hello.
In recent years, so much has been talked about what the MBA is worth, especially from a cost-benefit analysis point of view. I'm sure some of you have seen those WHA articles floating around. Friends, family, everyone had an opinion when I said I'm going back to school to get my MBA. But this is a very real question we face when deciding to go back to school.
Yep, I agree. A full-time MBA at Ross costs around $146K if you are a Michigan resident, and about $156K in tuition for international and out-of-state students. Estimated cost of living, personal expenses, and books and supplies come up to around $30K. That's definitely a heavy investment to make.
Yep. But like you said, it is an investment, and there are many ways to go about financing this investment. Savings, student loans, and generous scholarships have made this achievement possible for so many of us at Ross and other business schools as well.
And today we have Yashvi, Vraj, and Vashisht to talk about their experience with financing the MBA, what resources they tapped into, and what incoming and prospective students need to keep in mind when making these decisions. But before we get started, I'd love to hear from all of you guys to introduce yourself and share what program you're in and where you're from. I'll go first. My name is Jasmin Lopez. I'm an MBA 1, and I'm from New Jersey.
I can quickly reintroduce myself. I'm Aishwarya Dhume. I'm an MBA 2, and I'm from Mumbai in India.
Thank you all for having us. My name's Yashvi Patel. I'm an MBA 2, and I'm from the Chicago area.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vraj. I'm an MBA 2 as well, from India.
Hey guys, I'm Vashisht. I'm an MBA 2 and I'm from India too.
Amazing. Thank you guys for joining us. I know we're all in the full-time MBA program, so we all have that in common. I think, Vraj, you have a dual degree at Michigan?
Yeah, I'm a dual degree. This is my 3rd year here. So a lot of financing decisions I had taken before choosing the dual degree path, essentially adding another 100K and how I wanted to go about financing those potential avenues.
Yeah, that's true. So basically, all of us have taken at least a 2-year, if not 3-year break from our work lives to come back to school and get our MBAs. All right, so to get us started, can you give a rough breakdown of how you have financed your MBA? So that is when you look at loans versus your personal savings versus scholarships, or even maybe your family helping you out. What did that breakdown look like for each one of you?
Yeah, I can get us kicked off. So I'll start off with my first year in University of Michigan, which was my year with the School of Engineering. And I decided that I wanted to completely use my own savings, as well as I got a loan from my dad. I didn't want to tap into any other bank loans because I wanted to save up on the interest. So majority of the financing for that school program was through my savings. I also got an on-campus job, so I was a GSI. which helped me pay for the tuition for an entire semester. And it was a great help. And after that, coming to Ross, I had a key decision to make. Do I want to employ the same tactics or get a personal loan from the bank? I got an education loan because I have a few relatives here in the US who are citizens. They've been here for a long time, and I was able to leverage their credit scores in order to get better interest rates. And at the same time, they help. I've been paying back those interests in the school year itself, which has been helping me build my own credit scores.
Nice. You mentioned taking up a job as a GSI, which is interesting, and not everyone does it or is able to do it. Can you quickly walk us through what that looked like?
Essentially, a GSI is a graduate student instructor. Unfortunately, Ross doesn't have GSI positions. They do more TA-ships as well as research assistant positions, which are paid by the hour. But if you're a dual degree, you are able to leverage the connections with the School of Engineering or any other school that you are a dual degree part of. And what essentially that means is that if the professor finds you academically capable of teaching that subject, they'll offer you 0.25 or 0.5 GSI position. It essentially means that if you're a 0.25 GSI, you get to work 10 hours a week. If you're 0.5 for heavy course loads, you get a full tuition waiver. And that was a tremendous help because I didn't have to worry about my tuition, as well as they give us a well enough stipend to fund your stay here. So it was great to have that for a semester.
It is awesome. I know, like you said, Ross does not have GSIs, but I know of our Ross classmates who have actually managed to secure GSI positions in other schools. They networked their way through it. They had the exact skill set for it. In like public policy, there were other schools too that they were able to get it, and that helped out with their tuition. So I know Ross students who are not dual degree students also have been able to kind of do this successfully, which is awesome. So thanks. That's unique, and not everyone does that.
I will say on the flip side, I tried applying to GSI positions and they did not take me, in part because I didn't have the skill set. Not probably in part, fully, probably because I didn't have the skill set for that subject. And they're like, no, thank you. So I think it's incredible you got one. I do want to call out they are competitive, especially if your background is more traditionally business and you would cleanly fit into Ross. It might be a little bit harder to get into some of the other schools' GSI programs. But if you have an undergrad background or have worked in public policy or public health, it might help a little bit more. But that's it. I can kind of talk through how I financed. Mine was also kind of split into MBA 1 versus MBA 2 year. I had worked for about 5 years before coming to Ross, so I had some savings set aside, and so was able to rely on that for a lot of the first year. But then, kind of like Reg, I also got an on-campus job, not as much as like a GSI job, but I worked with some professors and did some grading and things like that with them last year. MBA 1 year, I was also involved in the Impact Studio as a Applebaum Fellow, and so we also got paid for that. And so I was able to help use some of that income to supplement mostly daily cost and like monthly rent and things like that, not necessarily tuition. And then MBA 2 year, it was really helpful having that summer internship money because that pretty much went to the next tuition payment. But then I also have an in-semester internship this year that very much helps with some of those like month-to-month expenses. And so relied on that. And then this last semester, I also hit a point where I needed to take on some loans. So I just used the federal government Department of Education loans to help finance out the rest of the year.
Okay, so I wanted to clarify. So MBA 1 year, your tuition was funded through your personal savings. Okay, nice. Yeah. And then your second year, you were able to take out federal student loans, which are available to domestic students.
Yes, exactly.
Got it. Okay, really helpful.
Can you walk us through a little bit of that process? Was it fairly easy for those who maybe aren't familiar with taking out loans through the Department of Education? What did that process look like? How soon did you hear back? You said you kind of pulled them out towards the end. So
yeah. So when you fill out like the FAFSA form, you get a set amount. As graduate students, you're allowed to take, I think, $20,500, what the current threshold is for Department of Education loans. And usually they allocate them, they split them between first and second semester. But in the spirit of trying to have less interest, I was like, I will just take them second semester and I'd rather pay more upfront from what I did have versus trying to do that split. But I found that process to be super simple. So if you filled out the FAFSA, it's already kind of tagged to your account. So when distributions go out, whether it be in terms of scholarships and things like that, it's just another line item on your tuition bill. In order to get it modified or adjusted, you just have to email like the Ross financial aid office admissions, someone. There's an office in Ross that does it. And you just email them and they're able to make adjustments or updates. And like they were very receptive and very quick to do it. And then beyond that, I think it was honestly a pretty seamless process, at least from those loans.
Quick question, Yashvi. So in terms of the FAFSA thing, could you talk about the rates? Because I know FAFSA comes with some protection in terms of if you don't get a job, the government would at least help in the interest payments. I know that's the case for undergrad, but I'm not entirely sure if that is the case for the grad students. But in terms of rates, I'm assuming it's a little costlier than the private options, I'd imagine.
Yeah, there is some security to your point with that. I think you get a little bit more grace period on that as well. And then in terms of the loan cost itself, I want to say it was in the realm of 7 to 8% with like a 2% origination cost. Right. But I think it heavily depends on like how soon you're planning on paying them back or like what you've got lined up and what that timetable looks like for you. Right. If you think you're going to need a larger time horizon, I think the security of federal loans is really useful, but you might have to in turn pay that higher premium. If you think it's going to be a shorter time horizon, I think both of them might be a little bit more equivalent because of how the loans start accruing interest.
I can go next. So I received a scholarship from Ross that originally covered around 65% of my tuition. The remaining I funded through an education loan back from India. I was exploring options between the US and India. And I found that the rate of interest was more or less the same that I had. I didn't have any relatives over here, so I couldn't get myself a co-signed loan. That being the case, so I looked at the rates and they looked fairly similar between India and the US for an unsigned loan. And I figured a loan from India would potentially help me in terms of the exchange rate. So it's always been increasing. So when I pay money back in dollars, that would work in my favor. So that's something I was looking at. The good thing about securing a loan from India was that I got a 2-year loan. I didn't have a 1-year loan. So I took a lump sum amount and that kind of covered me for both the years. In the second year, like Yashvi said, the internship helped in at least running through most of it. And I also worked in semester with the same company I was interning at in my fall semester. So that gave me a little bit more cash that I could then, play around with. I didn't repay my loans and I didn't use any of my savings because I wanted to keep them invested in India in the equities market. So I wanted to keep that going over there. So yeah, that's more or less how I went about the whole financing decision.
I can add my perspective here too. I usually am the one asking questions, but this time because I did it a little differently, I'll add my side to it. So I'm also an international student and I worked for 6 years in India prior to coming back to Ross. And I also, similar to Vashisht, chose to keep my savings in equity markets in India because I figured the return on investment I would make in the 2 years there would be greater than the interest I would pay if I were to take out a student loan. And then when I was comparing this India versus taking out a loan in the US, I realized taking it in India wasn't really an option for me because you need your parents to be a co-signer with you on the loan. You need to put up some property as well. They need some...
collateral.
The collateral, that's the right word. They need collateral to get a loan. You need collateral to get a loan in India. So it wasn't an option for me. And in the US, I don't have family, so having a co-signer wasn't an option either. So interest rates, just to put it out there, were heavy in the year we came to school, which was 2023. It was around 11% when I took on my first student loan. And the way it works in the US, which is a good thing, is it's disbursed by semester. So you're not accruing interest for the entire 1-year loan in one go. So they disburse the first semester loan, then they disburse the winter semester loan after that. I got some scholarship from Ross, which was helpful. But I think the real help was the internship money and then the signing bonus that came in second year fall semester, which meant by MBA 2 winter semester, I did not need any loan. And then I could rely on what I had from the first year plus internship plus signing bonus to take care of my second year winter semester. The other thing I wanted to add is what you can do at Ross is if you front load your credits, then your final semester at Ross, which is our winter semester, second year, you can take a reduced course load. So if you're taking less than 8 credits, then you're paying per credit. And then at that point, you're paying less tuition. So I was able to bring my final semester down to 5.25 credits. And that's because my first year winter, second year fall were all 18 credits. So by front loading, I was able to bring it down to 5.25. So that's another thing I just want to put out there for any incoming students. That's an option if it works out for you.
That's great. And thanks to all of you for sharing all these different options. One thing that hasn't been mentioned yet, and I'll jump in and kind of talk about my experience, was private loans in the U.S. So I took out, and maybe as people have been kind of searching for student loans for graduate school, they've heard of Juno. So I went through Juno to get my private student loan. And so basically what that is, it's you put your name in, there's this company that's doing this great negotiations with all of these banks in the US to try to get the best rate possible for incoming MBAs. And so I was able to be a part of that. And I think my interest rate was like a 6.75%. I will also add that I did not have anyone co-sign the loan with me. If you do have someone co-sign the loan with you, it can be a little bit lower of an interest rate. I also pay like $25 a month towards the loan to make the interest rate just a little bit smaller. And so I did that for my first year. I'm still exploring other options for my second year. So it's great to hear from all of you, but I wanted to add that in as well. Definitely look into that if you're interested in private loans.
Juno's awesome. I interned at Juno.
Oh, did you?
That's a plug.
Yeah.
Actually, I think so. Vraj and I also took out private loans in the US. So
okay.
because international students are not eligible for federal loans.
Right.
So that's why that's the only option we're left with too.
Gotcha. So we talked about where you turned to student loans and kind of what the interest rates were looking like. Did you put any of your own savings towards your MBA or any other things that people can think about as they're kind of preparing for business school, that they can, get a summer job or find something freelance or some type of side hustle they can do to kind of like kickstart their savings journey for the MBA?
Pre-MBA, it helps, especially, I think, if you're an international student, it's kind of hard for you to move those savings from India over here. I think I found that personally challenging because the currency doesn't work in your favor. I think the options of savings generally start kicking in your second year. In the first year, with the whole recruiting cycle going along, you might not have enough time for you to work on these. So in terms of savings, the markets in India have been doing very well. They've been doing better than the rate of interest. So I would advise that people, at least keep their savings over there, explore your loans, or if at all you can get maybe you can get some funding from your parents or something of that sort, you could look at that. But I wouldn't say there's anything in particular that you could do pre-MBA that would help prepare your savings over here. But yeah, once you're here, I think there are a lot of options that you can then explore.
I will say, now we're here, so we're focusing on financing the MBA. But this journey starts when you start doing the GMAT, which is also
That's
not
true.
cheap if
That's
you
true.
think about it.
That's true.
Yeah.
So I feel like personal savings went towards GMAT. That application fees add up when you're applying to multiple schools. Then there's the deposit. But at that time, we don't have any loans. So you're using towards that. Initial expenses, you need a deposit towards your apartment or anything else, whatever.
Your visa fees.
Visa fees. All of that came out from personal savings, I'd say. Yeah, but otherwise, I did not touch personal savings when I was in the US.
I did a complete opposite. Like Vashisht, I had a lot of my savings in the equities market. But what I found was that the equities market in the US performs usually better, and as well as since the currency is in our favor, when we transfer the funds back, I was able to transfer most of my funds from the equities market towards my tuition in the first year. And after that, all the savings that I gathered, I put it back into the US market. And I was able to get fair enough returns from that to pay towards the interest rates, as well as use them for my monthly expenses here in the US. And also, I would suggest having one skill which you can leverage to side hustle. I'm a photographer, so every graduation season, for 2 weeks, I disappear and I take pictures of undergrad students and frat houses for a very good, appreciated amount of money. And I never turned them away. But yes.
Anyone else hustling on the side?
Yeah, I feel like some of these in-semester internships make such a big difference because, again, they might not chip away at the tuition bill, but they chip away at living costs. And as we've mentioned, all of that adds up as well. So I feel like for me, when I came into the program, one of my goals was to like not necessarily rent, but be able to pay every other expense that happens on a day-to-day basis, from just like doing some of these like in-semester internships or like these side hustles. And for the most part, I think I was successfully able to do that with the jobs that I held while I was on campus. And so I think that was really helpful. But Jasmin, to your point about like the savings question, I ended up using my savings during the first year. But for me, it was important to leave retirement allocated funds alone and just leave those invested in the market. And especially because a lot of those were in like more tax favorable accounts. So I just didn't touch retirement assets and left them alone. But then when it came to like personal savings, I did dip into those to help pay for tuition and things like that.
The other thing I can add is like on-campus jobs, a popular one at Ross is peer coaching. They pay what, $18 an hour. And in peak recruiting season, I'd say I was clocking about 15 hours over 2 weeks is average because we get paid in that 2-week bracket. That was good. So in peak recruiting season, that's a good one to have. But if not, then yeah, it's worth having that relationship with your professors to work as a research assistant or a grader and everything that I think Yashvi's already mentioned.
Yeah. And I think like the greater Michigan ecosystem has multiple job boards that have jobs listed that you can like go in and through and apply to get them. So last year I ended up being a proctor and a grader. So I graded for an undergrad strategy professor. And then I also helped proctor exams during like midterms and finals week. And I think being a proctor pays around $15 or $16 an hour. But it is just like, you're just kind of sitting there and you're making sure people don't cheat, but you can also get a paper done on the side. So that was really helpful. And then the in-semester internship I'm working, or the company I'm working with right now, I actually sourced from Ross Recruit. It was just like a weird listing. And I was like, I wonder what this does. And then I applied and I interviewed with them and I'm still working with them and I've had a great experience. But I know for plenty of people that they haven't sourced their in-semester internships from Ross Recruit necessarily, but from other connections. But I know that that's also definitely an option. So even if you're not recruiting for a summer internship or full-time, it's also worth just kind of staying on top of what things get posted.
Okay, I'm curious, and this is probably how the episode should have started. How much was money a consideration when taking this decision?
I think for me, huge. I think that was one of my primary considerations because I see myself settling down in India long term.
Okay.
That's something I think I'm fairly set about. I was certain that I wouldn't come to the US unless a significant amount of my tuition's already covered by a scholarship.
Okay.
So I had an admit in the 2022 cycle too. Yeah, we came in 2023. It seems like ancient times now. But I couldn't secure a scholarship. So that is one of the reasons why I didn't come down to the US. So I think, yeah, this was one of my primary considerations. Without the scholarship, I wouldn't have come here.
So that consideration kicks in. So you apply and then you are like, okay, let's wait and watch.
Yeah,
that was
my way of thinking. I did not force myself out of anything in the application cycle. I felt I was like, let them make the decision for me. So yeah, that was something which I felt. And I was also working with GMAT Club before coming here. And I had some inside data. So there was a strong correlation between, at least the students from India, a strong correlation between your scores and the scholarship levels. So that kind of went together. So I then knew the ballparks that I had to hit to have any hopes of a scholarship. So I kind of went around and played with that and it worked out.
Yeah, for me as well, I think it was a huge consideration. I was thinking of just like the ROI on how much you make, how much you're paying, all of that good stuff, and the metrics of like walking away from your current job for 2 years. You're most likely passing up a promotion cycle at your current position and like all of those factors. I was very indecisive during the application process. So I applied to 9 programs, heard back from all the programs, then just like sat with the decision for a hot minute. And then like each school offered different scholarship packages. So it was an evaluation of the financial considerations versus like what doors would they potentially offer, where I wanted to be for the 2 years, what kind of environment I wanted to be in, like what that community looked like as well. And so I was taking a lot of those factors into play. And then at the very end, I remember I like asked Ross for an extension because I couldn't make up my mind. And they gave me like a 2-day extension. But eventually, like, you just have to commit at some point.
I think that's the case for most people. I tried for an extension at another school and I realized they gave me a 2-week extension.
Oh, wow.
I realized it doesn't help. It doesn't help one bit.
No.
It doesn't.
Unless you're waiting on information from a different school to get in, like, it doesn't.
It doesn't.
No. But so Ross does not negotiate, and like that's the line they have put out. And as far as my experience has been, they have very much stuck to that line of like not negotiating.
That has changed.
Yes,
that has changed for this year's cycle.
What?
So this is an inside scoop kind of thing. This year they're trying out new like scholarship negotiations. They're waiting and seeing how it goes.
Okay.
When you say this year, it's the
for the
incoming class of
Batch
2027.
of 27.
So
I
at this
see.
current moment, if someone has already been admitted, they can submit other competing offers to admissions, and we'll see what happens. It's first year, so we don't really know what the outcomes will be, but they have the option to submit. So bad news for all of us, but good news for them. Yeah.
This is breaking news.
Yes.
Kellogg, Tuck, and Cornell negotiated with me. Ross did not. And I was like, what are you guys doing? But it's fine. I'm still here.
Interesting. I thought Kellogg also did not negotiate. I thought they were one of those two.
They did negotiate at the time, but I don't know if much like Ross, if it was just that year or maybe because it was a booth offer they negotiated. I don't think they would have negotiated with a non-True Cross admit offer.
Yeah, I tried to negotiate even though I had no other competing offer. I was like, let's go for it. What's there to lose? And they were like, nope.
They shut you down.
Yeah. I feel like we've kind of trickled into the conversation of scholarships, which was like our next discussion topic. Jasmin, you want to push everyone further?
Yeah. Well, I know that Ross gives quite a few merit-based scholarships. Some of you mentioned that you're here on scholarship, and some of these cover obviously a significant part of your tuition. For those who do have a scholarship, can you share about what that scholarship looks like? If there's a name for your scholarship, do you mind just kind of talking about maybe how you earned it, if you're aware of that? And then did you negotiate these scholarships, which it sounds like a lot of us didn't, but if there was something you did to kind of at least try that could help future students, would love to hear that as well.
Yeah, happy to get us started. I think the easiest time to get money from Ross is when you're admitted. After that, there is a couple other opportunities throughout the 2 years that you're here. But if you're someone who is coming in relying on that money, it's probably not the most practical way just because you just don't know what it's going to turn out to be. And those opportunities are just fewer and the amounts are potentially less than what you would get when you initially come in with your scholarship package. That being said, I got 2 scholarships while I was at Ross. The first one was during MBA 1 year, and there's an application that comes out, I want to say in February of your MBA 1 year, and it's for the Community Impact Scholarship. That scholarship was for $10,000, and you go through and you submit an application to it, and then they release decisions, I want to say in March. We also have Vraj here, who is the recipient of that one, so I'll let him chime in if he has anything more to add on that point.
Yeah, I think I agree with whatever Yashvi said, that the best time to get any big amount of scholarship from Ross would be upon your admit, and anything after that is just to chip away at any leftover tuition that is remaining. And for Community Impact Scholarship, I think it was a super easy process. I just had to fill out an application and there was nothing left to lose. It was just filling it out. And I was very grateful that I got the scholarship because it essentially meant that I had to take less loans for my second year, and combined with my internship money and then signing bonus, I was able to greatly reduce the amount of second year loans.
Yeah, and that Community Impact Scholarship gets directly applied to tuition. So it just kind of pops up into your account when you're looking in MBA 2 year, and it's just there, which is really nice. I know over the summer there was a couple more scholarships. I personally just missed deadlines on them, but I'm sure there's some friends in Ross somewhere who did get them and very excited for them. But just keeping an eye out, there is like a link or something that goes live at some point, and it is well communicated, but you get so much communication. It's just a matter of keeping your eye on it. And then MBA 2 year, I was also incredibly grateful to get the Skip and Gordon Impact Scholarship. And that one, much like the Community Impact one, it was another application. They did a great job of advertising these opportunities. I applied and again, just like was feeling really grateful for getting that scholarship. And that one was $7,500. And those funds were directly sent to your bank account. Like it didn't go directly towards tuition. So you had a little bit more leeway if you wanted to apply that to tuition versus books and rent. So it was also kind of interesting to see how Ross distributes funds based on what type of scholarship it is. And then there's a couple other more targeted scholarships that are in like the financial aid page that you can apply as a second year or a first year once you're admitted. But a lot of them are niche to like specific either identities or to what your future career is going to look like and things like that.
This is amazing, and congrats, guys, on those scholarships. I remember seeing Yashvi's name come up back to back on LinkedIn, and I was like, go. But for the benefit of our listeners, can you guys also, and you guys need to like now talk a bit about yourself. What do you think you did in your first year that helped you secure these scholarships? And I know you're taking a wild guess, but you have clearly contributed to the community that has helped you do this.
So in the application, they clearly ask how. It's the exact same question. How did you contribute? How did you contribute to the community? And all I did was just list out the things that I had been part of. So I helped a lot of students who were coming from India before they got here because I was a dual degree and I had the benefit of being here. So I helped a couple of them with securing housing, just helping them negotiate with their like house realtors. And the second part was that I also mentioned that I'm the VP of International Students for the second year. I guess that helped. And that was pretty much it. And I just mentioned all the things that I've been part of. The clubs that I helped run, the clubs that I might be leading the next year, and also the TA positions that I'd held. So it was an amalgamation of all the things that I'd done at Ross.
Yeah, I think it really is that involvement because I remember looking at, especially for the Community Impact Scholarship, there was 10 recipients our year. Of the 10, I know 5 of them were consortium individuals. And of those 5, I don't think most of us had any common clubs. Like we may have had like 1 or 2 overlapping club here and there. But for the most part, we were very much like in our own verticals of different clubs or different types of involvement we were in Ross. So I don't think they're looking at it in terms of a checkbox of like, these are the 5 things you have to be involved with. But I think it's very much people who had taken the time to invest in the community as much as the community invested in them and like had used their time and energy as the resources they were giving in that moment. So kind of like Reg, I had also been involved in a couple different club leadership experiences, had also really helped with either admitted or prospective students at that point. I was involved in Sanger and the Impact Studio and other spaces on campus and in Ross. And I think the scholarships themselves are really just looking at how are you really giving back to Ross? And it's kind of like Raj and Aishwarya said with the question, it is truly like, how are you giving to that community? But that definition of community, I'm sure, looked different for every single person who got the scholarship and like which spaces they were most active on.
Just a quick question. So these scholarships that you guys had received, they're through Ross?
Yes.
Because I knew a couple of folks in our cohort who also received U of M scholarships. So there is the Ross-based scholarships, and then there's a wider umbrella where anybody who's a part of U of M can apply for these and get some funding. And I think they're pretty well funded too.
Yes.
So one of my older roommates applied to one of these. I don't remember the name exactly.
The
Dow Fellowship. Yes, that one. So he applied to that and he got in. And from what I remember, it was fairly sizable. Yeah.
I think when you come into Ross, if you are someone who comes in knowing what you are here for and what you want to do, and those are the activities you build your profile upon, like if you are the environment and the sustainability people, there's a lot of additional funding opportunities for specific funnels. If you come in as like the healthcare person, there's a lot of things that Ross does, U of M does, and like I know friends who have gotten funding that are like more universal and compiled of multiple business schools. And if you cleanly fall into a specific career interest or your profile or application indicates a specific career pattern, you're more likely to find the scholarships that are aligned to that. if you're someone like me who just kind of bopped about and like didn't quite know what their thing was, there's also opportunities, but I think you just have to look for them in a different way.
I want to add to that, and this is more for prospective students. Ross is actually quite generous with scholarships. Of the top 10 business schools, that was my experience from just doing research and also from looking at our classmates. So there are 3 scholarships that I know of that cover full tuition: Dean's Impact, and Health Innovation Scholar.
Mm-hmm.
My roommate, Health Innovation Scholar, she worked in pharma prior to Ross, so her entire tuition was covered. Dean's also is a 100% tuition scholarship. Dean's Impact is 100% tuition plus like a stipend you get to cover your living expenses too, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's about $15,000.
Yeah, they're basically paying you to come to school. Now, I can't speak, and even they can't speak for sure what exactly helped them secure Dean's and Dean's Impact. I think Health Innovation is pretty straightforward even then. Dean's and Dean's Impact, I would say it's like a mix of everything is what they always say, like your amazing work experience, leadership roles, GMAT, whatever you have with great essays. But I just wanted to put this out there for like prospective students to keep it in mind to position their applications in the best way possible, because Ross has these opportunities and they give it every year to at least a good number of our classmates have them.
I'll jump in there and say that I have the Dean's Fellows scholarship. So, so my tuition is fully covered. That's not to say that I don't, like I said, I have loans for living expenses and other things. But yeah, there is really, like she mentioned, there's really no way of knowing what part of your application stood out to them, or, test scores or community service that you've done in the past, or your work experience, or what you want to do after business school. But yes, definitely keep it in mind, because I think it was already mentioned, like Ross has some of the best scholarships out there. And even if you don't get one of those scholarships, there's so many other scholarships that have already been mentioned here today that you can earn in your second year or whatnot.
Like, obviously it would fluctuate year over year, but do you know approximately how many students in the cohort have either the Dean's or the Dean's Impact?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. For Dean's I can't speak to the other two. I think there's smaller subgroups for Dean's Impact and the Health Innovation. But for Dean's Fellows, I believe that across the 2 years, I think there's like 55 or something like
very
that.
generous.
So yes, definitely a big chunk of people.
Yeah, because that's 55 over 800 students, right?
Yeah,
about 2 years worth.
Oh, that's 55 for the 2 years?
For the 2 years, yeah, I'm pretty sure.
That's good.
Don't quote me on that, but from the calendar invites I've received, I've seen that number. Yeah. So
that makes sense.
And to add on to that, I know it has nothing to do with financing the MBA. With those scholarships, there's like breakfast you get invited to, study breaks, like little perks here and there. We're getting jackets next week. So, and obviously a lot of camaraderie with the people who are also on the scholarship. So,
and then just to add on that, as a person who applied through consortium, I know Michigan also does several consortium scholarships on top of that. And they tend to range from a set dollar amount to a full ride as well. And that's separate from like the Dean's and the healthcare and the Dean's Impact Scholarship. So I think until you really start talking to peers, you just don't know what's been given or been allocated. Some of which you'll be like vaguely aware of, some you'll get to know a little bit better.
For sure. Well, kind of going off of that, what advice do you have for students who are applying now? You've mentioned a couple things, do your research, talk to students, but is there anything that they can do to get a higher scholarship from Ross, or just things that they should be keeping in mind as they're kind of going through this process?
I can get started. So I think we've talked a lot about scholarships and loans and what have you. One thing which a lot of people tend to forget about is loan refinancing. So that's something you could do when you're graduating. So refinancing is, the way it works is when you've got your existing loan getting taken over by another firm or a bank, and then give you a fresh loan, most times at better rates of interest. They take a look at your
to income?
Debt to income ratio. Yeah. They take a look at that in deciding the rates of interest, and that generally works in your favor. So at Juno, anecdotally, I'd say for most people, it was between 3% was the best rates that we'd seen. And in most cases, it was below 7%. So that's another way you could potentially look at reducing the rate of interest that you're paying. So that's one thing that I just wanted to float it around here.
Yeah, that's good timing. That's what I'm now looking at you can do refinancing after graduation. So I'm literally just waiting to graduate and then hit up SoFi and be like, yo, refinance my loan.
I think the question was what advice you have for the students applying.
Yeah.
I think now that Ross has introduced negotiations, I think it might be beneficial to have, or at least apply to schools so that you can submit competing offers. And as well as, I think it might be a good time to have better GMAT scores because, as Vashisht mentioned earlier, that there's a high correlation between the scores and the scholarships offered. Might not be true now, but the data suggests that. So I think getting a good GMAT score, applying with that, and then also having great essays to go with it, and then submitting competing offers might get them better scholarships now.
Yashvi, do you mind sharing what the consortium is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the consortium is this incredible organization. They're a coalition of multiple schools across the United States. And it is a way for the organization has this commitment to advance the ranks of African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Native Americans in business education or in corporations. And so really what the consortium does, it helps provide a platform for people who either identify of those identities or for people who have helped advance this mission. And it brings them together and it has its own set of opportunities and things like that. But ultimately, it helps create this community for people who are going through those shared experiences.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And thanks for all that you guys have contributed so far. Now let's take a brief pause to hear from one of our sponsors. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about how we're budgeting through the MBA process.
This episode is sponsored by the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. Through our podcast, you can connect with the people and experiences that define the Ross way. Check out our other podcasts, such as Working for the Weekend, an exploration of the part-time MBA experience, Business and Society, a business podcast with award-winning Michigan Ross faculty, and Down to Business, a new interview series with Ross alum in the C-suite, hosted by Dean Sharon Matusik. All podcasts can be found on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
All right, we are back. I know we are about to talk about budgeting, Jasmin, but before that, one question, and this was suggested by JT, so we're going to bring this up because it's super relevant. How have our recruiting decisions, our choices, and journeys been impacted by how we financed our MBA? This is a personal one, so.
I think it's super relevant because of the fact that all of us mentioned that we have been supplementing not taking out as much loans with working on campus or with in-semester internships. I think if you're someone who's recruiting, it might be something that you want to avoid just because recruitment is so intense, as well as I personally got very tired after recruiting and I just wanted to take a break. And a lot of the people go through the same process. So I feel that some people might want to take more loans because they want to incorporate some of the living expenses, and Ann Arbor is not cheap. The rents have been going up every year. So I think recruitment plays a big part primarily because not having the stress of being well-financed and not to worry about that aspect helps at least me focus more on the recruitment aspect.
I think I tend to agree. So my perspective in this was more pre-MBA than during the MBA. So like I said previously, I'm kind of set on going back to India. And also as an international student, there is the whole H-1B thingy that's going on. So it's possible you don't get your H-1B and you might have to go back home. So one of the things that I factored in before coming here was what are the jobs or the target areas that I'd want to go to, wherein I'd be able to pay, if not all of, at least most of my loan while I'm here. So that's a 3-year OPT that you generally get. So one thing which I also focused on was what are some of the careers and target companies that I can potentially look at, wherein a lot of this would then be taken care of. So at least if I go back home, financially I'm not that burdened and I've got some experience which I can then build upon in India. So that was one consideration that I had. But once I came to campus, I felt, I mean, like Roger said, having that loan kind of helped me focus a lot more on recruiting, and which is why I didn't do a lot of stuff, employment or otherwise, in my first year.
I think when I came into Ross, or when I was looking at graduate programs, recruiting was a big part of obviously why we're all here. But I knew beyond that, I wanted to take advantage of these 2 years where you're intentionally stepping outside of normal life. You have this extra time and capacity. And like, how often do you get to be in a place of greater education and like an institution where you can learn just to learn, or you can go try things just to go try things? You can do that in the real world and working life, but it's not quite the same as having just like different set of responsibilities here. And so I knew that, especially when I was trying to balance the financial priorities, there was all of these other experiences I wanted to cultivate for myself in these 2 years. And I wanted to be intentional about how I spent a lot of that time, whether it was with other people and getting to know them, or if it was more of the institutes within Ross and the experiences they offer, or even in the greater Michigan ecosystem. And so when I was thinking about financing, I knew I wanted to take on some sort of in-semester internship, but I also wanted to see how I could fit it in terms of like bandwidth and capacity. And so when we talk about recruiting specifically, especially like MBA 1 year, first semester, there's a million things happening, but there's a million recruiting things specifically happening that I think it's really hard to actually commit to like any other supplemental sources of income and still have the bandwidth to do recruiting and quote unquote the extracurriculars. And so to both of your points, not stressing myself out about taking on something that gave me either a lot of hours or pay the most by hour. That wasn't a consideration because I just didn't have the hours to give to that job regardless. So I just didn't worry about it. I was like, this is a sunk cost of a semester on that, and we're just going to move on.
Jasmin, was it different for you given that you had a full tuition? Like, do you think it gave you more flexibility with your recruiting choices?
Yeah, I was going to say that I heard your question a little bit different than how others have responded to it, because I have peers who have specifically chosen specific industries or functions because they know that they have $100,000 to pay back after, or, you know, even more than that, right? So they've chosen specific career paths where they know they're going to make a lot of money post-grad. They'll be able to pay back their loans in 2 to 3 years and then exit into something else, or stay in that and then just start making money that's actually theirs, right? And so for me, I think I was very intentional about why I came to business school. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And so whether the school, and kind of to one of the other points that was mentioned, I didn't want to come to business school if at least 50% of my tuition was not covered by scholarship. I also thought about my employer potentially like contributing to that. So I explored that company sponsorship option as well. So once I got my full tuition scholarship, I didn't really make any changes. I just was like, okay, this is even more so of a reason why I need to make sure I definitely get what I came here to get, which thankfully I did for my internship. And so I don't think that for me it was as pressing, but I know that for some of my peers that have that, you know, they log into their FAFSA and they see how much they owe, they are like, no, I can't take on jobs that don't pay as much because I have all this money to pay back.
Thanks for adding that. That actually was my question. And maybe I can get started because the question was a little personal, because that is kind of where my mindset came from. I won't lie, and this is being brutally honest. A part of the reason why getting a certain job was extremely important was because I knew the kind of student debt I had. And I know we try to say it's not about the money, but the reality was during the recruiting journey, if I'm being very honest, at least 40 to 50% of the reason why I wanted the job was the money. The other 50% was I came to business school because I wanted to go into that industry. That's also equally true. But this was my reality. Did I think about it actively? So I tried to block that thought out because it really would bring me down through first fall. And it, like so much so that till interview day, I had to be like, Aishwarya, just do not bring that into this. Just put your best foot forward. Everything else will get figured out. So for me, it was like that question inched very close. And it was similar to what you said. I'm one of those people who had that looming in the background. Like, you need that job because you have that student debt to pay off.
Yeah, and you touched on, well, thanks for being vulnerable about that. But also you touched on one big piece that I think we haven't mentioned, and everybody thinks about it. So for our listeners, like if that's what you're going through or you eventually experience that, like it's totally fine to log into your accounts and see all this money you owe or start thinking about your future. And then, you know, money is part of that. And so as you kind of start going through this process and you want to say yes to all the things and all the activities and all the clubs, but that bank account, your savings are dwindling, like it's definitely a very overwhelming feeling at first. And then you kind of just have to remember the investment that you made, which we talked about at the beginning of the episode, and really think back to why you're here, what you're really trying to get out of the experience, and hopeful that it'll all pay itself back at some point. Well, let's go back to the budgeting question that I originally asked. How are we budgeting for personal expenses? You know, people have heard about the trips that we all go on, and how are we particularly paying for those trips, if you're open to sharing?
Yeah, I can get us started on this. Coming into Ross, especially as a prospective student, I feel like when I talk to students or when I talk to alumni, everyone just had such fond memories of some of these trips. And like, were very easily some of those highlight moments of Ross in these 2 years. For me, I kind of, when I was thinking through these 2 years, the experiences I wanted to cultivate, I really did sit with which trips or things would be the ones that I actually really wanted to go on, and like added them as a priority for myself. But that meant some people were able to do a lot more. Some people did less trips, but I picked the ones that I really wanted to do and I did those. And then I just was like, it's just not in budget to do the other 5 treks that are happening this year. You're like, you're cut off. You got your 2, you're done. And so for me, that was a way of just framing it. I was like, you picked them, you did it, move on. And there was no like regret or looking back on some of those trips, because you're like, this is your budget. This is how much money you have. But when it came to like everyday expenses, I think for me, what I was like, I just like didn't expect. First week of school, you go and you have this incredible clubs fair. And then there's dues to pay for all these clubs. And you're like, I'm sorry, what? And then you're like, okay, fine, I'll just pay the dues. It's not the end of the world, whatever. And then you go to actually sign up for the activities and the events. And you're like, wait a minute, I have to pay more to actually go to this event? Or like the member versus non-member costs would be different, which you're like, great, there's a nice perk. But I think MBA 1 year, I sat with it and I was like, okay, there's certain clubs where I'm sure they'll put on great events, but I don't need to be a member of, because I can just show up to the event and pay my $10 extra at the door. Little things like that. And I think not that like it's this huge void in our pockets, but all of that cost does add up, especially if you're not expecting it. Plus it's like the mental of it. You're like, oh, I have to pay more to go do this. So when it came for like budgeting for things like that, it was important to me that that didn't come from savings or from loans. I was like, you're going to do your hourly work, and this 1 hour of TAing here is going to pay for this one event, or like these 2, whatever. For me, it was like a 1-to-1 way to budget, because it also helped frame how I was spending. And it just kept me aware of like, do you actually want to go to this event, or are you just going to go just to go? And I think that helped a little bit in terms of what that source of money was. And I didn't track it per event, but like that is how I generally thought of how much I was spending on a weekly basis.
I like that thought process, the 1-to-1.
Yeah, we tend to forget about those nectar nights
Yes,
that
exactly.
happen
Like those
every
add up.
other
If
week.
you want to go to Nectar, you got to go work 2 hours.
I can go next. So I am generally extremely minimalistic.
As am I.
Yeah, so I barely spend anyway. So I was okay in just doing a lot of these things. So one thing I was actually thinking of shedding some light is giving some baseline expenses at Ann Arbor that could potentially help incoming folks just understand how much a month might potentially cost them over here. So apart from tuition, you've got rent, which can vary from, say, anywhere between $800 to $900 at some places, and I understand the Yard's charging folks $1,800 next year. So,
and that's $1,800 for a 1-bedroom and a
Yes.
3-bedroom apartment.
yes, that's correct.
I just
That
want
is
to clear
correct.
up that's not just like
That
a
is
personal
correct.
unit.
That is correct.
Yard's not gonna like this episode.
They're not a sponsor though, right? That's fine.
So yeah, I think that is going to eat up most of your budget for a particular month. Other than that, I tend to go out and eat. I think that's my major source of expense. For some reason, I've become a sucker for Indian food ever since I've come here. Never used to have that in India, but over here, you give me anything Indian, I'll gorge. So a lot of Indian food. A biryani costs around $18.
So you factor in biryani costs into your daily budgeting.
I will say to Vashish's point though, like I feel like Ann Arbor restaurants charge what I would expect a Chicago restaurant to charge, or like at least a Chicago suburbs restaurant to charge. And I didn't expect that. I thought it'd be a little bit cheaper because we're kind of in the middle of nowhere, but we're not, I guess.
So, like I said, I was actually comparing rents between Ann Arbor and another school that I got admitted to the previous cycle. And the rent's the same. And this is a big city. Like,
What city would it have been?
This is Seattle. So I was also looking, Foster was one of the schools which I got into, and I was also comparing rents, and it was, rents in Seattle was fairly similar to rents in Ann Arbor. I'm like, wow. So yeah, a lot of my expense, at least going out, goes into biryani, so that's that.
Biryani budget?
Biryani budget.
So yeah, in the first year, I did almost every Skeeps, at least in Fall A and Fall B. I did all the bosses. I didn't do the MBA because I wasn't confident in myself showing up everywhere. So,
And yet you did, it sounds like.
Yeah, you did.
so there's that. So I think for the bus and Skeeps, it's $10. Correct me if I'm wrong.
At the door,
At
not
the door.
sticker.
The
Yeah.
bus is
No, bus
Bus is
more.
like 25.
Bus
right?
bus is
25.
more depending on the game.
I think 25 is the minimum.
Correct.
That's minimum for bus. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I've not been to a lot of buses this year. So
And add in football tickets if you get those as well for the season.
yeah.
So yeah, I did football tickets, but I also knew the games that I wasn't going to, so I was able to sell those off. So I don't count that as an expense, but I think broadly, I'd say these are some of the expenses that I'd say I factored in. I didn't invest heavily in furniture, so I like barely anything. So I just have a mattress and a couple of lights. So that's kind of a living situation. So I think I saved up a lot in front over there. Yeah.
I mean, on that note, pro financial tip, buy the Michigan football season pass, even
Yes.
if you're not a football person. One, because those are very easy to sell in like the internal MBA Slack, but also there's a Greater Michigan WhatsApp group where you can also sell tickets and you can probably sell them for more. And then the big ticket actual games, you will make your money back for the whole season on that one game.
So there was a PhD guy who bought a ticket to some random nondescript game for $100. I'm like, yeah, be my friend.
yeah. Sell them to the PhD, sell them to the undergrads.
Yeah.
That's what we're here for. So buy the football pass, even if you're not a football person.
And the big OSU games go for 1,000, but
What?
Yeah.
1,000.
So there's this site that you can go to, StubHub, that you could go to, and you could sell tickets over there, and they go for crazy amounts. But I'd say go to the OSU game. It's awesome. Like that is one of my best
It's worth
experiences.
$1,000 of experience.
Yeah, I got to rush the field, like run into the field after we beat them. It was brilliant.
Okay.
So biryani budgeting.
Back to budgeting. Back to budgeting. Vraj, Jasmin, anything?
Back to Vashish's point. My approach was completely different. I have a car, so that is an expense I have to pay every month. I wanted my home to feel like a home and not.
Agreed.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for filling that out. So I've spent on my furniture, but what I did was that I went on Facebook Marketplace and found good dining tables, a coffee table. The only expense that I actually made for a new thing was my TV and my PS5 because I'm an avid gamer, and those things I cannot let go of.
Boys.
Yes.
That's like hobby budget, though. You know, not like
Yeah, that's like my
hobbies, not
biryani
furniture.
budget.
Yeah.
Myself and my flatmate, we got ourselves a TV though. I must say, we've got ourselves a TV for $60 on Facebook Marketplace, so that we could do PS4. So
Boys, again.
But again, coming back to the interest payments for the loan. So like Jasmin, I don't do the minimum interest. I pay off the entire accrued interest for each loan. So I have to pay close to 2.5K every month just for interest. It helps me reduce my interest rate by like 1.5%. And what it did was I have to be on point with my budgeting every month. So I create an Excel sheet, which I input all my credit card statements as well. It calculates everything and it tells me what I have in savings and what I need to take out from my investments here in the equities market. I also own some Bitcoin, which I sell very often when I need to.
From my perspective, I definitely am in the same boat. I wanted my apartment to feel like an apartment, but I chose to live in an apartment that is like 4 stops away on the bus stop, but Ross folks consider that far. It's at Woodbury Gardens. So I don't know. But I have cheaper rent there. And one of my biggest things was that I wasn't going to live with a roommate. And so to have that experience, I chose to live a little bit further away. Again, it's literally a 6-minute bus ride or something. And then I have to give a plug to my partner because my partner works. And so I have some day-to-day budget from that. And then my credit cards have really been my best friend, to be honest. Like once my savings kind of dried up, then I kind of leaned towards that and using my points for flights for some of the trips that we've gone on. So I've converted those into airline points. I have an airline credit card, so that kind of helps me with like baggage fees and upgrades and all that fun stuff. But yeah, I just hope that my post-MBA employment will help me pay off the cards.
You wanted to talk about credit cards.
I did. Yes, I did, because I think that everyone has them, everyone uses them. And I think that if you use them correctly, you can get some perks. Like there's definitely a lot of cards that have some different benefits for the different things that we're doing here. So like a hotel credit or like an airline credit or rental car insurance, that kind of stuff. But to one of the other points that's been made as well, like I don't have a car here. And so I sacrifice that part as well to not have to spend on gas, insurance, maintenance, to be able to do other things. So you kind of pick and choose what you're comfortable with. You can be comfortable with one bed and 2 lamps, you said you have. Or you can like really furnish your space. And one TV, yes. $60
and a PS5.
TV. So I think that there's definitely a lot of different options to be able to make it work in the short term, I would say.
When we talk about like furnishing and all of that, I just want to call out MBA 2s who are graduating or MBA 3s will post somewhere or another all of the furniture they are now looking to sell because they don't want to move with it. And I know a lot of friends who are able to buy off of people who are moving and things like that. So if you're admitted, I know there's an admitted student Slack. If things haven't been posted in those Slacks, just ask and someone in admissions will probably direct you to something or another, or some student ambassadors in there will direct you to a thing or another. And then when we talk about rent and things like that, just calling out that a lot of times when you sign leases in the US, they're usually for 12 months, or you have to negotiate to get them to be less than 12 months. And it's mostly important because a lot of us aren't in Ann Arbor for the summer. So a lot of people go and try to sublease their place, and then you'll just sublease someone else's place in the summer for whatever city you are going to be in. But I know, for instance, I have friends in Woodbury who have done shorter leases, and so they pay a little bit more per month, but then it's a shorter lease. So they don't have to pay for 12 months. So when you're making some of those decisions with your apartment, just doing the math on that to make sure, like, do you want to sign a 9-month lease and pay a little bit more each month? Or if you're not going to be here in the summer, that might actually be cheaper than signing a 12-month lease, even though the sticker price per month might be a little bit less. So just thinking through what the year is going to look like so you can make some of those decisions.
So I lived in Woodbury in my first year. But yeah, it was far, far away.
Yeah, I agree with Jasmin.
To be clear,
it's
6 minutes away.
Yeah.
Don't scare our listeners.
I don't think the 9-month lease worked for us, though. I mean, in terms of pricing and things like that, those guys extracted it.
I'm sure. They know. If you're a landlord in Ann Arbor, you know what you're doing because your main clients are students. So you know the numbers. But again, especially if you're going with an independent landlord, just taking a little bit of time to think through that, or requesting it so it works for you before you sign and commit.
I think we've covered pretty much everything in the budget area. I think rent, trips, those were the big ones. We've touched upon them. I don't know if I have much to add. I'll say one thing. I do have a 12-month lease too, but in the summer between the first and second year, I was able to sublet my room in the apartment, and this was through Facebook groups. And that worked out, so that covered some portion of rent over the summer. That's one thing I'll add. The other thing is, as international students, we also pay up around $250 per month towards our health insurance, which is separate from our tuition. I just wanted to call that out. I don't know if domestic students have a different, something on the insurance front to add, because that's usually an important bucket. But yeah, and classic MBA students, none of us brought up books in our budgeting, because what is that, guys? We don't have academic expenses. That's the best part. Not one of us was books. We were no trips. But anyways, that's the reality.
Just to pitch it, I think the only academic expense that I have are notebooks, which I tend to see every semester. I go in with this hope, rather, I wouldn't say a name, that I'm going to attend every class.
And I never see you in class.
I'm gonna make notes. I'm gonna write it myself.
And aspirational like that too.
And it never happens for some reason. I can't put a finger to it. So I got a lot of notebooks.
But I think, Aishwarya, to your point, about the academic textbook cost, there's 2 ways Ross bills you for books. And so one of the ways is that it automatically...
Case studies.
Yeah, or it automatically hits your tuition bill and not a separate line item expense. And so if it does that, I just never think about it. And I never process the fact I'm paying extra. But then the other way is when professors like don't necessarily have the time to like submit that ahead of time. So then you do have to manually pay more. And then I get outraged. And I'm like, oh my God, I have to pay these extra $60.
I have to pay to study?
What? It's the worst. But like when it hits my bill automatically, I just don't process. And I just don't get outraged in the same way. So I just don't think about it from a budgeting perspective. But then when I do have to manually pay extra after the fact, I'm like, I refuse to do this. I mean, I do it, but I refuse to do this.
Then we start splitting expenses. Colombia, no problem. But books, we're splitting it up around
100%.
like 5 of us.
True. Wait, does $20 chat GPT count as academic expenses?
Well, Ross now has its own little thing. Maisie, is that what it's called? You guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, UMGPT.
Something like
I
that.
have not used Maisie yet.
Same here.
You can't say it with a straight face.
Maisie. Is like, what a name.
I've used Perplexity Pro though. Ross gives you access to Perplexity Pro.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've had some very creative reports which I was able to generate through DeepSeek. People thought it was completely original when DeepSeek initially came out. It was just not ChatGPT, so it gave out an entirely different output, and the professor really loved it.
Now I think that the episode's spiraling.
Thank you.
Now the episode's definitely spiraling into something else.
Thanks for bringing us back, Raj. So, okay, this has been like amazing, but like I know we need to wrap up, but I have one question that came to mind. Do you guys have any tools or apps you use for budgeting? Because I don't. I know I should, I know people talk about it, but then I get lazy.
I linked my credit cards with Rocket Money. It's really helpful because it tracks and it also shows up what I'm spending on. Mm-hmm. So conscientiously, when I see that I've spent $500 on going out, the next month I'm trying to reduce that. Mm-hmm. And also going to bars because I've been trying to cut down on alcohol. So if I see a bar expense, that definitely is a red flag. And I think it's a great app overall. Okay. It also cancels all unused subscriptions. So I have to never worry about talking to the customer care, because a fun fact here is that it's a pain to cancel subscriptions in the US. They just keep redirecting you to customer care again and again.
Amazon Prime.
Yes, Jeff Bezos. That's pretty much it. I use Rocket Money. It has been very helpful and it helps just track things better. And the Excel sheet.
I think adult me pre-MBA was a lot more meticulous about expenses and like was on top of my life. And then I came into this program and I was like, we cannot bear the thought of actually knowing some of this information because it's going to hurt more. So best not to know. So now I don't track like in a meticulous way because I was like, your income does not match your expenses. We just don't need to know this. So let's not.
Wasn't the MBA meant to help you to be more meticulous?
No.
Post-MBA. Maybe.
Post-MBA.
Post-MBA. Now I have the skills to pick this hobby up post-MBA, but in MBA, absolutely not.
Yeah, I don't track anything.
Yeah,
that's
I would
my
sleep
contribution.
Okay.
I can't.
We had a MAP reunion recently, and one of my teammates stated this very nicely. He's like, MBA is like 2 years where you spend like you're earning, but you're not. So yeah, that's just the reality. Okay. Anything else before we wrap up? Okay.
Yeah, so I know budgeting can be big, and like especially for people coming in and any first years who are still here. I think you guys are almost second years now. That's fair. But yeah, I'd say still have fun at MBA. Like, don't factor in money everywhere, because this is also one of the last times that you'd be in an academic setting, low pressure zones. You'll have boring post office catch-ups and parties, which snooze fests. Do the
snooze fest.
Yeah, have fun over here. Go to Colombia. Go to football games. Pick and choose the things that appeal to you and do that. It's also important to be happy. I know finances are a large part of the whole MBA experience, but there's also the entire recruiting cycle. So to keep you sane, you might want to engage in some of these just to ensure you don't go cuckoo. But yeah, that's my kind of 2 bits about this.
And on that note, my first boss, when I was in MBA 1 and MBA 2, told me that money is a social construct. And I was like, okay, fair enough. Money's not real. I believe that. For 2 years.
We were playing poker once, and one of my friends told me money is a frame of mind. Poor girl got ragged the entire night after that, but...
Okay, I love that wisdom to wrap this up, guys. This has been such a good episode. Like some of the tips everyone has shared, different journeys that everyone's taken to finance their MBA is super, super helpful for those who are listening, I hope. But this has been also a lot of fun, like good information, but also a lot of fun doing this with you guys. So thank you for taking out the time. Business Beyond Usual is brought to you by the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. Today's episode was produced by myself, Aishwarya Dhume, alongside Vashisht Sai and Mark O'Connell, the executive producers of BBU. Special thanks to studio producers JT Godfrey, Jonah Brockman, and Mads Henke. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, go blue, and this is Business Beyond Usual.